The thunder crashed against the mountains of Colorado Territory like God himself was taking aim at the earth. But nothing compared to the storm brewing in Lillian O'Connell's heart as she struggled to haul herself up the muddy embankment. 7 months pregnant and miles from anywhere, the 22-year-old widow felt the baby inside her shift restlessly as rain pounded her shoulders and soaked through her threadbare dress to the skin. The year was 1875, and the promise of a new life had turned to ash in her mouth. Her husband, Thomas, had been dead less than a month, shot during a failed bank robbery in Denver that Lillian hadn't even known he was planning. She'd been left with nothing but debts, a growing child inside her, and the scorn of a town that believed she must have known about her husband's criminal activities. Just a little further, she whispered to herself, her fingers digging into the mud as she tried to pull herself up the steep slope. The stagecoach had left her at the crossroads 5 miles back, the driver unwilling to take his horses any deeper into the mountain passes with the storm approaching. Her cousin's homestead was supposed to be just beyond this ridge, her last hope for shelter and a new beginning. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the path ahead for a brief, terrifying moment. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and Lillian felt her foot slip. She cried out as she began to slide backward, one hand flying protectively to her swollen belly. Whoa there. Strong hands caught her from behind, steadying her with surprising gentleness. Lillian twisted to see a tall figure silhouetted against the stormy sky, his broad-brimmed hat shedding water like a roof. "Madam, you shouldn't be out in this, not in your condition." His voice was deep, with the slight drawl of someone who'd spent time in Texas. As another flash of lightning illuminated the scene, she caught sight of his face, weathered but youthful, no more than 30, with eyes that seemed to catch the storm's energy within them. "I have to get to my cousin's homestead," Lillian explained, her voice nearly lost in the howl of the wind. "It's just beyond this ridge, the Harrigan place." The stranger's expression changed just slightly, a flicker of something Lillian couldn't read. "The Harrigan place burned down 3 weeks ago, struck by lightning. They've moved on to California." The news hit Lillian like a physical blow, her last hope gone. Her legs gave way beneath her, and she would have fallen had the stranger not caught her again, this time sweeping her entirely into his arms with surprising ease. "I'll carry you to my cabin," he said, his voice firm but kind. "It's not far. You and your little one need to get dry." "I can walk," Lillian protested weakly, though they both knew it was a lie. The man adjusted his grip, cradling her against his chest as if she weighed nothing at all. His eyes met hers, steady and certain in the storm's chaos. "I'll carry you forever if I have to, madam." No one gets left behind in these mountains, least of all a mother and child. Something in his words, in the steadiness of his arms around her, broke through the wall of despair Lillian had built around her heart. She let her head rest against his shoulder as he began to walk, picking his way carefully along a path only he could see. "I'm Zachary," he said, raising his voice above the storm. "Zachary Pullman." "Lillian O'Connell," she replied, her voice catching on a sob she couldn't quite suppress. "Well, Mrs. O'Connell, hold tight. We've got a ways to go yet." The rain continued to pour as Zachary carried Lillian through the growing darkness, his steps never faltering despite the treacherous terrain and his burden. Eventually, a small cabin came into view, a single lantern burning in the window like a beacon of hope in the wilderness. Zachary shouldered open the door and carried Lillian inside, setting her gently on a chair near the wood stove that radiated blessed heat throughout the simple one-room structure. He moved with efficient purpose, building up the fire, hanging his dripping coat and hat on pegs by the door, and pulling a blanket from a trunk to wrap around Lillian's shoulders. "You're safe now," he said, his voice softer in the quiet of the cabin. "Both of you." As the warmth began to seep into her bones, Lillian looked around the cabin. It was sparse but neat, with a few books stacked on a small table, a narrow bed in one corner, and various tools of a frontiersman hanging on the walls. Not the home of a drifter, but of a man who had made peace with solitude. Thank you, she said, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along. Zachary knelt by the stove, putting a kettle on for tea. I was tracking one of my horses that broke fence when I saw you on the ridge. Providence, maybe? Or luck, Lillian said, a hint of bitterness in her voice. Though luck hasn't been too kind to me lately. Zachary glanced at her, his eyes taking in her condition, the absence of a wedding ring pawned weeks ago for food, and the exhaustion etched into her young face. Your husband? He asked gently. Dead, she replied flatly. Hung for robbing the Denver Mercantile Bank. I didn't know he was planning it. Everyone thinks I did. She hadn't meant to blurt it out so bluntly, but the words had been bottled inside her for weeks with no one to tell. Zachary didn't recoil in disgust as she'd expected. He simply nodded as if receiving information about the weather. People are quick to judge what they don't understand, he said, pouring hot water into a chipped mug and adding a handful of herbs. Especially when they're scared or angry. He handed her the tea, and the aromatic steam rose to her face, smelling of mint and something floral she couldn't identify. It'll help with the aches, he explained. My mother taught me about herbs before she passed. Lillian sipped the tea gratefully. What brought you to these mountains, Mr. Pullman? A shadow crossed his face. War, then wandering. Found I preferred the company of mountains and horses to most people. He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. The Harrigans were good neighbors, though. I'm sorry they're gone and sorrier you came all this way for nothing. The reminder of her predicament brought fresh tears to Lillian's eyes. She blinked them back furiously, determined not to break down completely in front of this stranger. I don't know what to do now, she admitted. I have $3 to my name and a baby coming in less than 2 months. Zachary was silent for a long moment, then stood and moved to the small cupboard beside his bed. He returned with a plate of cornbread and some dried venison. First, you eat and rest, he said firmly. Tomorrow's problems can wait for tomorrow. That night, Zachary insisted Lillian take his bed while he made a pallet for himself on the floor near the stove. Despite her exhaustion, Lillian found sleep elusive, her mind racing with worries about her future. The baby kicked repeatedly, as if sharing her anxiety. In the dim light from the banked fire, she could make out Zachary's profile as he lay on his makeshift bed, one arm flung over his eyes. There was something reassuring about his presence. This man who had appeared out of the storm like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even known to make. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that the world hadn't ended, despite how it had felt the night before. Lillian woke to the smell of coffee and found Zachary already dressed and cooking something that smelled delicious over the stove. Good morning, he said, glancing over his shoulder. Thought you might sleep till noon, the state you were in yesterday. Lillian sat up slowly, her body stiff and sore from the previous day's exertions. What time is it? Just past 7. Hope you like flapjacks. It's about all I can manage that's fit for company. There was an awkwardness between them now that the immediate crisis had passed the awareness of a man and woman alone in a cabin, strangers to each other, but forced into intimacy by circumstance. Mr. Pullman, Lillian began, carefully swinging her legs over the side of the bed, I can't thank you enough for your help yesterday, but I should be on my way as soon as possible. Is there a town nearby where I might find work? Zachary set a plate of flapjacks on the small table. Nearest proper town is Silverdale, 20 miles east, but they've had a rough winter, not much work to be had, especially for a woman in your condition. He hesitated. Mrs. O'Connell, I don't mean to presume, but I've been thinking about your situation. Lillian tensed. She'd had her fill of men's solutions to her problems on the journey west. Zachary seemed to sense her wariness. I've got a proposition, a proper one, he added quickly. I run a small horse breeding operation here. Been doing well enough, but it's more work than one man can handle. I've been meaning to hire help come spring. I don't know anything about horses, Lillian admitted. But you know about keeping a house, I'd wager, and cooking for more than one. The cabin needs a woman's touch, and I'd pay fair wages. You could stay here until the baby comes, save up some money, decide what you want to do after." He paused. "No strings attached, Mrs. O'Connell. You'd have the cabin to yourself. I can bunk in the stable till we figure out more permanent arrangements." It was a generous offer, suspiciously so. "Why would you do this for a complete stranger?" Zachary's eyes met hers, clear and direct. "Because someone once did something similar for me when I needed it most. And because those mountains are no place for a woman alone with a newborn and no shelter." Lillian considered her options, which were painfully few. "I'd earn my keep," she said finally, "and it would only be until I can make other arrangements." "Of course," Zachary agreed, though something in his expression suggested he doubted the existence of these other arrangements as much as she did. "We'll consider it a business arrangement, pure and simple." But even as they shook hands on their agreement, Lillian sensed there was nothing simple about what was happening between them. The next few weeks passed in a rhythm that became increasingly comfortable. True to his word, Zachary moved his bedroll to the small room attached to the stable, giving Lillian privacy in the cabin. Each morning, he would knock on the door at sunrise, and they would share breakfast before he headed out to work with his horses. Lillian took to cooking and keeping the cabin, grateful to have a purpose again. Her body grew heavier with the child, but there was a peace in the mountains that soothed the ragged edges of her grief and anxiety. Zachary, she discovered, was a man of surprising depths beneath his quiet exterior. He had fought for the Union in the war, though he spoke of it rarely and never with pride. He had learned horsemanship from his father in Kentucky, and had a particular gift for gentling wild mustangs that most men would have deemed unbreakable. In the evenings, when the work was done, they would sometimes sit on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in hues of gold and crimson. On one such evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, Zachary brought out a battered fiddle. "You play?" Lillian asked, surprised. "Poorly," he admitted with a rare smile. "But out here, there's no one to complain but the horses, and they've never been critics." He drew the bow across the strings, and a sweet, melancholy tune filled the air. It wasn't skilled playing, but there was feeling in it that caught at Lillian's heart. She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. When she opened them again, she found Zachary watching her, something unreadable in his expression. "That was beautiful," she said. "My mother's favorite," he replied, setting the fiddle aside. "She used to sing to it. You must miss her." "Every day." He looked out at the darkening mountains. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed someone who wouldn't let me retreat too far into silence." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Lillian felt her cheeks warm and blamed it on the evening air. "I should check on the bread," she said, rising awkwardly due to her condition. Zachary was on his feet instantly, a steadying hand at her elbow. "Let me help you." His touch was gentle but firm, and Lillian found herself leaning into it more than strictly necessary. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the air seemed charged with possibility. Then the baby kicked, hard enough for Zachary to feel it through his hand on her arm. His eyes widened, then crinkled at the corners. "Strong little one," he said with a soft laugh. "Going to be a handful, I reckon." "Like his father," Lillian said automatically, then felt the familiar stab of grief. Thomas had been charming and reckless, full of dreams that never quite matched reality. She had loved him once, though that love had been strained by his schemes and broken promises long before his final, fatal mistake. Zachary's expression sobered. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to bring up painful memories." "No, it's all right." Lillian took a deep breath. "Thomas he wasn't the man I thought I married. He could be cruel when things didn't go his way. I mourned him, but I'm not sure I still loved him at the end." It was the first time she had spoken the truth aloud, and the relief of it brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Zachary didn't offer empty condolences or judgments. He simply nodded, his hand still steady on her arm. Life's rarely as simple as we wish it could be. In that moment, Lillian felt understood in a way she hadn't in years, perhaps ever. The feeling was as frightening as it was exhilarating. March gave way to April, and the mountains began to shake off winter's grip. The aspen trees budded with tender green, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows where Zachary's horses grazed. Lillian's time grew nearer, and with it came increasing discomfort and anxiety. "What if something goes wrong?" she asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "The nearest doctor is in Silverdale, and I sent word to Mrs. Tremont last week," Zachary interrupted calmly. "She's a midwife who lives about 5 miles south. She's delivered most of the children born in these parts for 20 years. She'll be here when your time comes." Lillian stared at him. "You thought of that when—" Zachary shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed. "First day you arrived, rode out to see her while you were sleeping that afternoon." The realization that he had been planning for her child's safe arrival from the very beginning touched Lillian deeply. She reached across the small space between their chairs and placed her hand on his. "Thank you, Zachary." He turned his hand to clasp hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. "You're welcome, Lillian." It was the first time he had used her given name, and it changed something between them, a shift as subtle but significant as the changing of seasons. 2 days later, Lillian woke before dawn with a sharp pain across her abdomen. She lay still, waiting to see if it would return, and when it did several minutes later, she knew her time had come. Rather than feeling fear, she felt a strange calm settle over her. She dressed as best she could and made her way to the stable, where Zachary was already awake and tending to a mare who had recently foaled. "Zachary," she called softly from the doorway. He turned, and something in her face must have told him everything he needed to know. He was beside her in an instant. "The baby's coming," she nodded, grimacing as another contraction began to build. "I think it might be a while yet, but yes." Zachary didn't panic or fuss. He simply nodded, his eyes meeting hers with steady reassurance. "I'll fetch Mrs. Tremont." "Can you make it back to the cabin?" "Yes, I think so." "Good, make yourself comfortable. I'll be back as quick as I can." He helped her back to the cabin, made sure she had water and everything else she might need within reach, then swung onto his fastest horse and disappeared down the mountain trail. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and waiting. The contractions grew stronger and closer together, and Lillian found herself walking the small confines of the cabin, trying to ease the pressure in her back. She thought of her mother, who had died bringing Lillian's younger brother into the world, a brother who had himself survived only a few hours. She thought of the women she had known who had been through this trial, some emerging triumphant with healthy babies, others broken by loss. And she thought of Zachary, his steady presence that had become the foundation of her new life. Whatever happened today, she realized, she wanted him to be part of what came after. The door burst open just as Lillian was beginning to fear she would have to face the birth alone. Zachary entered, followed by a stout woman with iron-gray hair and the most capable-looking hands Lillian had ever seen. "So you're the young woman Zach's been harboring," Mrs. Tremont said, her keen eyes taking in Lillian's condition with a professional glance. "Let's get you comfortable, dear. This little one isn't going to wait much longer." Zachary hovered uncertainly at the edge of the room. "Should I go?" "Nonsense," Mrs. Tremont said briskly. "Make yourself useful, boil water and find me clean linens." For the next few hours, Lillian surrendered herself to the ancient rhythm of birth, guided by Mrs. Tremont's experienced hands and soothed by Zachary's unexpected gentleness. He held her hand through the worst contractions, wiped her brow with cool cloths, and murmured encouragement when she felt she couldn't go on. "You're the strongest person I've ever known," he told her as she struggled through a particularly difficult contraction. "You can do this, Lillian. I'm right here with you." And then, as the afternoon sun slanted through the cabin windows, a new cry joined the sounds of the mountain. Mrs. Tremont placed a squirming, red-faced infant on Lillian's chest. "You have a daughter," the midwife announced, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "A perfect little girl." Lillian gazed down at her daughter's face, overcome with a love so fierce it took her breath away. The baby's eyes were squeezed shut, her tiny fists waving in protest at the bright, cold world she had entered. "She's beautiful," Zachary whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He was kneeling beside the bed, his face level with Lillian's, his eyes fixed on the tiny new life between them. "Would you like to hold her?" Lillian asked impulsively. Zachary looked startled, then honored. With careful movements, he accepted the swaddled infant from Lillian's arms. His large hands cradled the baby with surprising confidence. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world." Watching him with her daughter, something shifted in Lillian's heart, a recognition of what had been growing between them these past weeks, now impossible to deny or ignore. Mrs. Tremont busied herself with cleaning up, a knowing smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "What will you name her?" she asked. Lillian hesitated. She had thought to name a son after her father but hadn't settled on a girl's name. "I'm not sure yet." "You'll know when it's right," Mrs. Tremont assured her. "Now, you need rest, young woman, and this little miss needs her mother." Zachary reluctantly returned the baby to Lillian's arms. "I'll see Mrs. Tremont home," he said. "Will you be all right for a few hours?" Lillian nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the ordeal was over. "We'll be fine." Before he left, Zachary bent down and with heartbreaking tenderness pressed a kiss to Lillian's forehead. "You did something miraculous today," he murmured. "Rest now." When Lillian woke, the cabin was bathed in the golden light of sunset. Her daughter slept peacefully beside her, swaddled in a soft blanket Mrs. Tremont had brought. For a moment, Lillian simply watched her child breathe, marveling at the perfect tiny features that somehow combined her own and Thomas's. The door opened quietly and Zachary entered, carrying a tray with a bowl of stew and fresh bread. He moved with exaggerated care, trying not to wake either mother or child. "You're awake," he said softly when he saw Lillian's open eyes. "How are you feeling?" "Sore, tired, happy." She smiled, making room for him to set the tray beside her on the bed. "Thank you for everything today." Zachary sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes going to the sleeping infant. "She's perfect, Lillian, just perfect." "I've decided on her name," Lillian said. Hope Lillian O'Connell." "Hope," Zachary repeated, testing the name. "It suits her." "I thought so. She represents everything I'm hoping for now, a new beginning, a better life." Lillian paused, gathering her courage. "Zachary, I need to ask you something." He looked at her attentively, waiting. "Our arrangement. You said it was temporary until I could make other plans, but I've been thinking," she stopped, uncertain how to proceed. "Yes," he prompted gently. "I'd like to stay," Lillian said in a rush. "Not just for a while, but permanently, if you'll have us." Zachary's expression was unreadable for a long moment, and Lillian's heart sank. She had misinterpreted his kindness, mistaken friendship for something deeper. "I'm sorry," she began. "I shouldn't have presumed." "Lillian," he interrupted, taking her hand in his. "I've been trying to find the courage to ask you the same thing for weeks now." Hope blossomed in her chest, as bright and fragile as the wildflowers on the mountainside. "You have. From almost the moment you arrived, I've known I didn't want you to leave," Zachary admitted. "But I didn't want to take advantage of your situation or make you feel obligated because I helped you." "It's not obligation I feel for you, Zachary," Lillian said softly. His eyes met hers, filled with a vulnerability she had never seen in him before. "What is it then?" Before she could answer, Hope stirred and began to fuss. Lillian gathered her daughter to her breast and the baby latched on hungrily. Zachary looked away, giving them privacy, but Lillian reached out and touched his arm. "Don't go," she said. "This is part of who I am now, who we are. If you want us in your life, you should know what you're getting." Zachary's gaze returned to her face, his expression softening. "I want all of it, Lillian. The crying at night, the diapers, the first steps and first words. I want to be there for every moment of her life and yours if you'll let me." Tears pricked at Lillian's eyes. "I never expected to find this kind of happiness again," she admitted. "Especially not here at the end of my rope." "Maybe that's when we're most ready to recognize it," Zachary suggested, "when everything else has been stripped away." Hope finished nursing and dozed off again. Lillian adjusted her dress and then, with a boldness that surprised even herself, reached up to touch Zachary's face. His beard was rough against her palm, but his eyes were soft as they met hers. "I think I'm falling in love with you, Zachary Pullman," she whispered. He turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. "I think I fell for you the moment I carried you through that storm," he confessed, "but I'll need time to be sure we both will. There's no rush, Lillian. We have all the time in the world now." As spring turned to summer, Lillian and Hope became an integral part of Zachary's life and home. The cabin, once Spartan and utilitarian, bloomed with small touches that made it truly a home: curtains at the windows, a rag rug on the floor, wildflowers in jars on the table. Zachary built a cradle for Hope from aspen wood, carving delicate leaves and flowers along its edges. Lillian's strength returned quickly after the birth, and soon she was not only keeping house but also helping with the horses. She discovered a natural affinity for the animals, particularly the more skittish mares that seemed to respond to her quiet patience. "You have a gift," Zachary told her one afternoon as they watched a previously unmanageable mare eat calmly from Lillian's hand. "These horses trust you." "I think they just recognize another mother," Lillian replied, nodding toward the mare's growing belly. "She's going to foal soon, isn't she?" "Any day now. If the foal's half as fine as the dam, it'll fetch a good price come fall." They had begun to build a business together, almost without realizing it. Zachary's skill with training and Lillian's eye for bloodlines complemented each other perfectly. Word spread about the quality of their horses, and buyers began to make the journey to their remote mountain property. Through it all, Hope grew and thrived, the center of their shared world. Zachary doted on her as if she were his own flesh and blood, singing her to sleep with old Kentucky lullabies, and carrying her in a sling across his chest as he worked around the property. Watching them together, Lillian's heart would swell with a love so profound it sometimes frightened her. She had never imagined finding such happiness again after Thomas's betrayal and death. Yet here it was, built not on grand passions or promises, but on the solid foundation of daily kindnesses and shared purpose. They still maintained separate sleeping arrangements, Zachary in the room he had built onto the cabin, Lillian and Hope in the main room. Neither pushed for more, content to let their relationship develop at its own pace, deepening with each passing day. One evening in early July, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass, Lillian found herself thinking of the future. Hope was asleep in her cradle inside, and the mountain air was sweet with the scent of pine and summer flowers. "Zachary," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "have you ever thought of making this official?" He turned to look at her, his expression questioning. "Official? Us, this family we're building." She felt her cheeks warm but pressed on. "I know it hasn't been that long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life." Zachary's face broke into a slow, radiant smile. "Are you proposing to me, Lillian O'Connell?" she laughed, suddenly giddy with the boldness of what she was doing. "I suppose I am. Though if you'd rather do the asking, I wouldn't object." In answer, Zachary reached into his pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. From it, he extracted a ring, a simple band of gold with a single small pearl set flush with the metal. "I've been carrying this for 2 weeks," he admitted. Waiting for the right moment. Lillian stared at the ring, then at him, her heart pounding. "You had this all planned." "Not exactly planned," he said with a chuckle, "more like hoped for." His expression grew serious. "I love you, Lillian. I love Hope as if she were my own daughter. I want to make it real and right between us, a true marriage, a true family." Tears sprang to Lillian's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, that's what I want too." Zachary slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit as if it had been made for her. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She told me to give it to the woman who made me feel like I'd come home." "And do I," Lillian asked, her voice catching, "make you feel that way?" "From the first moment," he assured her, and then he was kissing her, his lips gentle at first, then more insistent as she responded with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time." "What took you so long?" Lillian teased, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "Respect, patience." His eyes crinkled at the corners. "Fear that you'd come to your senses and realize you could do better than a horse trainer with more scars than prospects." Lillian shook her head firmly. "There is no better man than you, Zachary Pullman. Not for me, not for Hope." They were married 2 weeks later by a traveling preacher who stopped at their property on his circuit through the mountains. The ceremony was simple, just the three of them, with Hope cradled in Lillian's arms and Mrs. Tremont as their only witness. Lillian wore her best dress, freshly washed and pressed, with wildflowers in her hair. Zachary had a new shirt for the occasion, and he'd trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair with water. "Do you, Zachary James Pullman, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked. Zachary's eyes never left Lillian's face. "I do." "And do you, Lillian Marie O'Connell, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Lillian replied, her voice steady and sure. "Then, by the authority vested in me, I pronounce you man and wife." The preacher smiled benevolently. "You may kiss your bride." Zachary's kiss was gentle but full of promise, mindful of the baby between them. When they parted, Hope gurgled and waved her tiny fists, as if giving her own blessing to the union. That night, after Mrs. Tremont had gone home and Hope was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Lillian and Zachary came together as husband and wife. There was awkwardness at first, the natural hesitancy of two people learning each other's bodies, but it soon gave way to a deeper connection that left them both breathless with wonder. "I never knew it could be like this," Lillian whispered afterward, her head pillowed on Zachary's chest. "So tender." Zachary's arms tightened around her. "It's different when there's love," he said simply. "Everything is." Fall brought the sale of their first crop of foals, including the colt born to the mare Lillian had gentled. The money they received was enough to see them comfortably through the winter and expand their breeding program come spring. "We should celebrate," Zachary declared as they counted out the money on their kitchen table. "A proper honeymoon, even if it's a few months late." "What did you have in mind?" Lillian asked, bouncing Hope on her knee. The baby was 5 months old now, a chubby, cheerful infant with her mother's dark hair and a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "Denver," Zachary suggested. "We could stay at a hotel, see a show, buy some things for the house. Maybe even look into getting a proper deed for this land." Lillian hesitated. "Denver is where Thomas died, where everyone thought I was complicit in his crimes." Zachary's expression softened. "All the more reason to go back with your head held high as Mrs. Zachary Pullman, respected horse breeder and mother. Show them who you really are." His confidence in her warmed Lillian from the inside out. "When you put it that way, how can I refuse?" They made the journey in early October, when the aspen trees were turning gold, and the air had just enough chill to make traveling comfortable. Hope proved to be an excellent traveler, content to sleep in the wagon or watch the changing scenery with wide, curious eyes. Denver had grown since Lillian had last seen it, the city pushing outward and upward with new buildings and businesses. They checked into a respectable hotel near the center of town, and Zachary insisted on carrying both Lillian and Hope up the stairs to their room, recreating that first journey through the storm. "You don't have to prove anything," Lillian laughed as he set her on her feet in their room. "I already married you." "Just making good on a promise," Zachary replied with a grin. "I said I'd carry you forever, remember?" The next few days were a whirlwind of shopping, sightseeing, and savoring the novelties of city life. They bought fabric for new curtains, books for the long winter evenings, toys for Hope, and a silver pocket watch for Zachary that Lillian insisted on paying for with her share of the horse sale proceeds. "Something to remind you of me when you're out with the horses," she told him as she pressed it into his hand. "As if I could forget you for a moment," he replied, but he pocketed the watch with obvious pleasure. On their last day in Denver, As they walked along the main street with Hope bundled against the autumn chill, Lillian felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find herself face to face with a woman she recognized from her previous life in the city, Mrs. Winthrop, the banker's wife, who had been particularly vocal in condemning Lillian after Thomas's crimes came to light. Mrs. O'Connell. The woman said, her tone somewhere between shock and disdain. "I hardly recognized you." Lillian straightened her spine, conscious of Zachary's solid presence beside her. "It's Mrs. Pullman now," she corrected gently. "This is my husband, Zachary, and our daughter, Hope." Mrs. Winthrop's eyes darted between them, taking in Zachary's obvious strength and protectiveness, the healthy glow of the baby, the simple but quality clothing they wore. I see," she said, clearly recalibrating her assumptions. "You've landed on your feet, then." "We've built a good life," Lillian agreed, neither apologizing for her past nor flaunting her present happiness. "Zachary breeds some of the finest horses in the territory." The woman's expression shifted subtly. "Is that so? My husband has been looking for a good saddle horse. We'd be happy to show him our stock next time you're in the mountains," Zachary said smoothly, his hand resting supportively at the small of Lillian's back. After Mrs. Winthrop had moved on with promises to mention their horses to her husband, Lillian let out a shaky breath. "Well, that was unexpected." Zachary squeezed her hand. "You handled it beautifully, dignified, not defensive. I'm proud of you." "It felt good," Lillian admitted, "to face the past and find it has no power over me anymore." They returned to their mountain home with renewed energy and purpose. The winter that followed was harsh but beautiful, the cabin snug against the storms that howled down from the peaks. They spent the long evenings planning for the future, expanding their herd, building a larger home as their family grew, perhaps even starting a proper school once there were more children in the area. Hope took her first steps just before Christmas, toddling unsteadily from Lillian's arms to Zachary's outstretched hands. The look of absolute wonder on Zachary's face as he caught her was something Lillian knew she would remember for the rest of her life. "Pa," Hope declared triumphantly as she collapsed against his chest, and Zachary's eyes filled with tears. "That's right, little one," he whispered, holding her close. "I'm your papa." Later, after Hope was asleep, Zachary pulled Lillian close beside the fire. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For what? For making me a father, for trusting me with your heart and her future." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I never thought I'd have this kind of happiness." "Nor I," Lillian admitted. "After Thomas, I thought that part of my life was over, that I'd have to focus solely on surviving, on providing for Hope. And now," she smiled up at him, letting all her love show in her eyes, "now I know that survival isn't enough. Life is meant to be lived fully with joy and purpose." She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "And family," Zachary's eyes widened as he understood her meaning. "Lillian, are you?" She nodded, her smile growing. "Dr. Miller confirmed it when we were in Denver. We're going to have a baby, Zachary. Hope will have a brother or sister by summer." Zachary whooped with joy, lifting Lillian off her feet and spinning her around the small cabin. When he set her down, his face was alight with happiness. "Another miracle," he said, placing his hand reverently on her still flat abdomen. "Our miracle this time." Spring came early to the mountains that year, as if nature itself was celebrating their happiness. The meadows around their cabin exploded with wildflowers, and their horses produced a crop of foals that promised to be the finest yet. As Lillian's pregnancy progressed, Zachary became even more protective, insisting on taking over the heavier chores and watching her like a hawk for any signs of distress. His concern might have been stifling had it not been so clearly born of love. "I'm not going to break, you know," Lillian told him one afternoon as he insisted on carrying a bucket of water she was perfectly capable of managing. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my baby," Zachary replied stubbornly. "Not my wife. I'm taking no chances with either of you." The baby arrived on a perfect June morning, with Mrs. Tremont once again serving as midwife. The labor was shorter than with Hope, but no less intense. Throughout it all, Zachary remained by Lillian's side, his strength and calm presence anchoring her through the pain. "It's a boy," Mrs. Tremont announced as the newborn's lusty cries filled the cabin. "A fine, strong boy." Zachary's face when Lillian looked up at him was transformed by wonder and pride. "A son," he whispered, his voice breaking. "We have a son." They named him Samuel James Pullman, after Zachary's father and his own middle name. Hope, now 18 months old and full of curiosity, peered at her baby brother with solemn interest when Zachary brought her to meet him. "Baby," she said, pointing at the swaddled infant in Lillian's arms. "That's right, sweetheart," Lillian confirmed. "This is your brother, Samuel." "Can you say Samuel, Sam?" Hope declared decisively, and the name stuck. As summer ripened into fall, their family settled into a new rhythm. Sam proved to be an easy baby, content to sleep in a sling against Lillian's chest as she went about her work. Hope was Zachary's shadow, toddling after him around the property and developing a fearlessness around the horses that both impressed and alarmed her parents. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Hope playing with wooden blocks at their feet and Sam nursing at Lillian's breast, Zachary turned to his wife with a contemplative expression. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "The day we met when I found you on the ridge." Lillian smiled, stroking Sam's downy head. "Often. It was the day my life changed course entirely." "Mine too," Zachary admitted. "I'd been alone so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be part of something larger than myself." He reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "If that storm hadn't come up, if you hadn't been struggling on that slope, we might never have met," Lillian finished for him. "It's strange to think how much depends on such small moments, isn't it? The entire course of our lives turned on that one encounter." "I used to think I was cursed with bad luck," Zachary said, watching as Hope abandoned her blocks to climb into his lap. "The war, losing my parents, the years of wandering, but now I know differently." "How so?" Lillian asked, shifting Sam to her shoulder to burp him. Zachary's eyes met hers, filled with a love so deep it still took her breath away. "All of it was leading me to that moment, to that ridge, to you. Every hardship was worth it if it brought me here." Lillian reached out to take his hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long familiarity. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "Every step, even the painful ones, brought me to you, to this life we've built together." As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lillian looked at her family, her strong, gentle husband, her vibrant daughter, her peaceful son, and felt a completeness she had never thought possible. From the darkest moment of her life had come this abundance of light and love, proof that even in the wilderness, hope could take root and flourish. "I'll carry you forever," Zachary had promised on that stormy day, and in all the ways that mattered, he had kept that promise. He had carried her through grief and uncertainty, through childbirth and new beginnings, through the daily challenges of carving a life from the rugged beauty of the mountains. And she had carried him too out of solitude, into the warmth of family and belonging. It was a weight they bore gladly for each other, a promise renewed with each sunrise, with each challenge met and overcome together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Lillian leaned her head against Zachary's shoulder, their children sheltered between them. Whatever the future held, whatever joys or sorrows awaited them on the path ahead, they would face it as they had faced everything since that fateful day on the mountainside. Together, with courage and with love. Years passed, and the small horse breeding operation that Zachary and Lillian had started grew into one of the most respected in Colorado territory. By 1885, Pullman horses were sought after throughout the West, known for their intelligence, stamina, and even temperaments. The cabin where their life together had begun now formed the heart of a much larger home, built room by room as their family and prosperity increased. Hope, at 10 years old, had her father's way with horses and her mother's quiet determination. Sam, 8 now, was more interested in books and numbers, keeping meticulous records of their breeding program that impressed even the most experienced ranchers who came to buy their stock. And there were others: William, 6, with a mischievous streak that kept his parents on their toes; Emma, 4, whose sweetness charmed everyone she met; and baby Joseph, just learning to walk, tottering around the yard on sturdy legs. One summer afternoon, as Lillian watched her children playing in the meadow near the house, Zachary rode up on his favorite stallion. Despite the gray now threading his beard and the lines that fanned from the corners of his eyes, he sat a horse with the same easy grace that had first caught her attention all those years ago, thinking deep thoughts. He asked as he dismounted and came to stand beside her, his arm slipping naturally around her waist. Lillian leaned into his embrace, still marveling at how right it felt after all this time. "Just counting my blessings," she admitted. "They're too numerous to name." Zachary followed her gaze to where Hope was teaching Emma to make daisy chains, Sam was reading under a tree, William was attempting to build a fort from fallen branches, and baby Joseph was investigating a particularly fascinating rock. "I never imagined this," he said softly. 5 children, a thriving business, respect in the community. He turned to look at her, his eyes as warm and honest as they had been the day he proposed. "A love that only grows stronger with each passing year." "Nor I," Lillian agreed, "especially not that day you found me on the ridge. I thought my life was over, that all my hopes had died with Thomas. And now," she smiled, reaching up to touch his face, tracing the beloved features that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. "Now I know that hope never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to bloom again." From the meadow came the sound of children's laughter, bright and clear in the mountain air. Hope had caught William trying to put a frog in Emma's daisy chain and was now chasing him with mock outrage while the younger children shrieked with delight. "I wonder sometimes what would have happened if I hadn't been tracking that horse that day," Zachary mused. "If I hadn't come across you on that ridge. I like to think we would have found each other somehow," Lillian said. "That some things are meant to be regardless of the path." Zachary's arm tightened around her. "You always were the romantic one." "Says the man who promised to carry me forever the day we met," she teased. He laughed, the sound still capable of sending warmth through her entire being. "Fair point, Mrs. Pullman." As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, Zachary turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. "I have something for you," he said, suddenly serious. "A surprise." "What kind of surprise?" Lillian asked, intrigued by the hint of nervousness in his manner. From his pocket, Zachary withdrew a small velvet pouch. "I had these made in Denver," he explained, opening the pouch to reveal 2 gold lockets identical except for their size. "One for you, one for Hope." Lillian opened the larger locket to find a tiny photograph of their family on one side, all 7 of them, posed in front of their home, and on the other, an engraving that made tears spring to her eyes. "I'll carry you forever. ZP." "Oh, Zachary," she whispered, closing her hand around the precious gift. "It's perfect." "I wanted you to have something to remind you of that promise," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I wanted Hope to know the story of how our family began, how one moment of kindness can change everything." Lillian looked from the lockets to her husband's face, then to their children playing in the golden afternoon light. From that desperate day on the mountainside had come all of this abundance, not just survival, but a life overflowing with love and purpose. "You've more than kept your promise," she told him, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. "You've carried us all in every way that matters." Zachary kissed her back, his arms encircling her waist. "And you've carried me," he murmured against her lips, "out of loneliness into this life I never dreamed possible." As the children noticed their parents' embrace and came running across the meadow, calling and laughing, Lillian thought again of that stormy day when a stranger had lifted her in strong, gentle arms and changed the course of her life forever. Some burdens, she had learned, were not burdens at all, but gifts, the weight of love, of commitment, of family. These were loads that strengthened rather than weakened, that built up rather than wore down. These were the promises worth keeping, worth renewing every day for all the days that remained to them. And as Zachary swept Joseph up in one arm while pulling William close with the other, as Hope helped Emma adjust her crown of daisies and Sam showed his father the chapter he'd just finished reading, Lillian knew with absolute certainty that they would continue to carry each other through whatever joys or sorrows the future might hold, through all the seasons of their lives together forever, just as promised.